the acting president. Your thoughts on generally the European reaction, which is more understated?
Yes, France is very important. We know Macron, and we thank you for all the support France and the President Macron gives to us in all our fights. And France needs to recognize President Juan Guaidó. In the last minute, UK recognized Juan Guaidó. And we know Spain will recognize, and also the Union, the Europe Union.
Concretely, should there be more sanctions, particularly when it comes to oil, in a nation that's already crippled by an economic meltdown?
Yes, all that thing, all the pressure against Maduro, all the pressure against the dictator, because this is the moment for change in Venezuela. We have been 20 years in a dictatorship, and in my family, 5 years in prison. Leopoldo Lopez started this fight 5 years ago against Maduro. And right now in Venezuela, we start a transition, a pacific transition. We'll have a new president and free elections.
I want to thank you so much for joining us, Lilian Tintori, the wife of Leopoldo Lopez, currently under house arrest, for joining us from Caracas.
Thank you.
And we'll have more with our panel in the France 24 debate coming up. In Kinshasa, history made the first peaceful transition of power since independence from Belgium in 1960. Congo's new president sworn in under the eyes of predecessor Joseph Kabila. The surprise winner of last month's poll, Felix Tshisekedi, announcing he'd release all political prisoners and paying tribute to his late father, opposition icon Etienne Tshisekedi. Felix Tshisekedi also calling for reconciliation in the wake of an election marred by fraud.
Taking the reins from Joseph Kabila, Party UDPS's leader Felix Tshisekedi has been sworn in as the new president of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
I solemnly swear before God and the nation to observe and defend the Constitution and the laws of the Republic.
The handover of power closes the chapter on 2 years of uncertainty when Kabila didn't step down even though his term had expired. The last months of Kabila's 18-year rule were also overshadowed by vote-rigging allegations for his succession. Runner-up Martin Fayulu continues to contest the result and accuses Tshisekedi of a power-sharing deal with the outgoing leader. The new president, though, called for a reconciled Congo.
The Democratic Republic of Congo that we will build will not be a country of division, of hate, or of tribalism. We want a strong Congo, strong in its cultural diversity and its dedication to its motherland. A Congo focused on its development, peace and security. A Congo for everyone, where everyone has their place.
A message his supporters welcomed. Thousands had gathered in the streets of Kinshasa to catch a glimpse of the historic transition of power. According to constitutional rules, Tshisekedi is set to choose a prime minister from Kabila's camp. This as they maintain a strong grip on the National Assembly.
Here in France, it's a leaderless movement. Still, some yellow vest protesters have put together a slate of candidates for European parliamentary elections this coming May, a slate which may expand. Already one snap poll has the movement in third place, ahead of many of the mainstream parties. Selena Sykes has more.
On the streets, in television studios and at the heart of efforts to organise the movement, Ingrid Levervasseur has become one of the leading figures of the Yellow Vests.
We've shown France that we're not idiots. I think we're capable of creating something.
She's now announced that she'll be heading a Yellow Vest list in the European Parliament elections in May.
French citizens no longer want to be subject to the decisions of European bodies and the diktats of the financial class.
The 31-year-old care worker is at the forefront of calls for a citizens' initiative referendum, a popular vote that would allow the French people to vet government policy proposals. It's one of the Yellow Vests' main demands, but they're divided when it comes to running in European elections.
I don't agree at all, because the Yellow Vests haven't created a list on my behalf.
If they want to present a list, they can go ahead, but with the knowledge that it could be manipulated.
In a survey on voting intentions, the Yellow Vests came in third place, behind Emmanuel Macron's La République en Marche and Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party. Findings that may be a cause for concern for political parties who had been hoping to win over Yellow Vest supporters at the polls.
I thought that the Yellow Vests in the streets supported the fact that the movement was detached from politics. At the same time, it's part of democracy.
I'm asking these new candidates to give some clarity, because politics is already so tainted in our country that if the Yellow Vests continue to taint it, the French people will be disillusioned with everything.
The Yellow Vests have so far named 10 candidates and hope to put forward another 69 for a vote by the 10th of February.
And we'll have more news coming up for you. Time now for the France 24 debate. Did Donald Trump make the right call on Venezuela? The U.S. president leading the way among the Lima group of North and Latin American nations that have decided, 11 of them, to recognize Parliament Speaker Juan Guaido as acting president. The 35-year-old emerging as the face of the opposition, swearing himself in on a copy of the Bolivaran Constitution. That Constitution states that the speaker is next in line if the president's out. But don't count out either Nicolas Maduro. In the nearly 6 years since he took over from the late Hugo Chavez, Venezuela's leader has beaten down all comers. And despite this week's failed mutiny at a National Guard barracks outside Caracas, Maduro still enjoys the support of army brass. We'll hear from his defense minister, which brings us back to the international community. Faced with the implosion of democracy, a meltdown of the economy that's forced a whopping 2.4 million Venezuelans to flee, are those foreign powers backing, nonetheless, coercive regime change, or as critics of U.S. policy in the region call it, is it a coup? Are EU nations right in taking a more cautious stance? Or does that make those European nations complicit in the humanitarian disaster that's unfolding inside this oil-rich giant? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, well, who's the president of Venezuela? And joining us is writer Vicente Ulive, author of I Killed Simon Bolivar.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We want to welcome as well Venezuelan commentator Gustavo Rincon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you to invite me.
From Washington, Ana Quintana, senior policy analyst for Latin America and the Western Hemisphere at the Heritage Foundation think tank. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Gregory Wilpert, managing editor of the Real News Network, the author of Changing Venezuela by Taking Power, the History and Policies of the Chavez Government. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 24 hours on international reactions, still pouring in to the U.S., but also the likes of Canada, Brazil, Colombia, and more recognize Juan Guaido as acting president of Venezuela. The U.S. president, in a tweet on Wednesday, calling it the illegitimate Maduro regime. At what point do you actively push for regime change inside of a sovereign state? Selena Sykes takes a look at some of the international reactions.
After being backed by Washington, Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido has won support from most of South America. 11 members of the region's Lima group, including Brazil, Colombia, Argentina and Canada, recognize Guaido as the country's legitimate president, after his declaration on Wednesday during mass protests in Venezuela and several other Latin American countries. The United Nations called for more talks to avoid the political crisis spiraling out of control.
What we hope is that dialogue
can be possible and that we avoid an escalation that could lead to the kind of conflict that would be a total disaster for Venezuela and for the Venezuelan people and for the region.
Brussels and European nations also stopped short of recognizing Guaido, instead calling for new elections.
Things happened yesterday, and we have to keep working in the European Union to see what we do. But it is obvious that there will be contact with the Venezuelan regime. Do you think this can be done ignoring the reality? The reality is what it is, and we must work with it.
A message that was echoed by French President Emmanuel Macron, who called Maduro's re-election illegitimate and praised the courage of Venezuelans who were taken to the streets. A number of key allies are still backing Nicolas Maduro. In South America, these include Uruguay and Mexico, who are calling for more talks between the government and the opposition. Elsewhere, Russia warned the US against military intervention in Venezuela and said the attempted power grab was a violation of the basics and principles of international law. A similar line was taken by Turkey and China, with Beijing saying it opposes international interference in Venezuelan politics.
China supports the Venezuelan government's efforts to safeguard national sovereignty and stability. China always upholds the principles of non-interference in other nations' internal affairs and opposes external intervention in Venezuela.
The EU is hoping to set up an international contact group with South American nations in February that would seek talks between Maduro and the opposition.
Vicente Olive, in that report, we saw that tweet from the French president, Emmanuel Macron calling Maduro illegitimate. Nonetheless, he stops shy of recognizing Juan Guaido as the acting president of Venezuela. He doesn't go as far as the U.S.
Yes, absolutely. There are two different things. Maduro is completely an illegitimate president because he was elected in 2018 through an election that had no international observers, where there was no opposition parties that were inscribed, except one opposition party that came from Chavismo, which was Henry Falcón. We had instances of voter fraud, and even the people that organized the election said they couldn't account for the results. So that was an illegitimate election made in May instead of December, because he knew in December people would not vote for him. So yes, he's a completely illegitimate president.
And your reaction to the fact that you have, on the one hand, the Spaniards, the French, the European Union with one reaction, which is cautious, and the other we've just seen in the last couple of hours, the UK Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt saying the United Kingdom believes Juan Guaido is the right person to take Venezuela forward. We're supporting the US, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina to make that happen. Not the same position.
Not at all. I think it's, well, pretty much shameful that some countries do take these steps when we have noted cases of human rights abuse that have been chronicled by different...
so France and Spain should go further.
Maybe not further, but at least the other ones that are on the tepid kind of side should establish that Maduro has to, be dealt with in a certain way through elections, is what I'm expecting in the internal Venezuelan point of view. But just saying that you don't know, that you want dialogue, we've had dialogues before between the opposition and the government in 2014 and 2017. These led nowhere if it weren't for people getting jailed. So dialogue is not the route to be taken here, in my opinion.
Gustavo Rincon, Emmanuel Macron's position, does it go not far enough, too far?
I think no. The Emmanuel Macron position is, you can explain that position about the situation in France. I think he has enough problem in France to start to have a speech against left wing in Venezuela. I think for that reason...
Has to do more with domestic politics.
I'm pretty sure that Gilets jaunes are more likely the reason that Macron can talk a lot about Venezuela. But about all the things you say, Vicente, I think you go very quick about all the situation in Venezuela. The last year we had election in Venezuela. We have a party for opposition that go to that election.
That's just what I said. They were illegitimate elections with no international observers, where even the people that organized the election said they couldn't account for the results, where all the opposition parties, most of them were in jail, they were in exile, people were thrown in jail. These are realities. I'm not saying it. You can look up the NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, That's a reality.
I understand what you say, but you are mixing facts. Because, yes...
You think the election was legitimate? You think Maduro was legitimately elected in a free and fair election where parties
I can say that. But,
of course you can.
But you can do the opposite. Ever.
Excuse me?
You can do the opposite.
What's the opposite?
Not possible. That the election was illegitimate.
That's just what you said. You just said the election was illegitimate. You can't say it's legitimate.
No, I'm observed the situation and the legal situation of the government is very, very troubled.
The elections were supposed to have place in December, not in May. Yes. How is it legal to have an election in May?
That terms. The position goes to that election last year.
No, yes, it's not true.
They did.
No.
They did.
No, they did not.
They did.
Henry Ford was not part of the opposition. The opposition abstained. For the reason that I'm just mentioning. You don't have international observers. How can you have an election when you don't have international observers? You can't account for the voting fraud that was registered.
No, I can't.
I'm stating facts.
I can
believe whatever you want.
You mix that about with persons that are in jail and with other things that happen in Venezuela. Look, it's very difficult to support Maduro right now, but I think his speech
Misses what?
Miss the point of view of the poor people of Venezuela, of the Chavista. You know why Maduro is in the power?
Is Maduro legitimate or is he illegitimate? That's what we're discussing. Not
the other president is legitimate.
Let's go back to the issue of the international reactions, and I want to pick up on something that Gustavo Rincon just said, which is there's an element of domestic politics when we look at it from here in Paris. The French far left up in arms. Its parliamentary leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon firing off a series of tweets saying, not in our name, because for Macron, a democratic election is, quote, illegitimate, and a far-right coup d'etat supported by Trump and Bolsonaro restores democracy. Enough is enough. Ana Quintana, is Donald Trump's and Canada and the other Lima Group nations that are with them supporting a coup d'etat?
I think we need to establish a few baseline facts here. This is not an ideological issue. This is not a U.S. interventionism issue. This is a good versus evil issue, right? So I think let's just talk about that from the onset. And I think the point that was being raised earlier about, is Maduro an illegitimate leader? Yes, he is. He is absolutely an illegitimate leader. As of January 10th, when he took office, over 50 nations declared him to be an illegitimate leader. So this is not a grand conspiracy against him. There is an international consensus, a wide variety of countries across the ideological spectrum that recognize that he is a danger to his country, he is a danger to his people, and the return of democracy needs to return. The democracy needs to return to Venezuela. This is not a coup by any shape or form.
Not a coup. Nonetheless, you're getting the sense the U.S. is tightening the screws, what with talk of further sanctions, particularly in the oil sector, of trying to funnel the money from oil revenues to Juan Guaido. In effect, it's trying to change the destiny of a sovereign nation.
So Venezuela ceased to be a sovereign nation the moment that this narco dictatorship took it over, and that's an unfortunate fact. The government of Venezuela is a criminal government. The oil industry, PDVSA, the national oil company, it's essentially a slush fund of the military. Maduro handed it over to Padrino and to the rest of the army, to his cronies in the army, as a way of buying off their loyalty and ensuring that they would stay loyal to him, right? That the upper echelons of the military would continue to have Maduro's back. And that's what they've done. And if you look at oil output, I mean, the Venezuelan economy is not in the tanks because of the international community or because of the targeted sanctions, the human rights-based sanctions, as a matter of fact. It's not a result of their own ineptitude and their own corruption. I mean, you have the vice president of Venezuela, who's a designated drug trafficking kingpin for working with Mexican drug cartels. You have over 100 Venezuelan government officials, rather, who've been sanctioned by the U.S. government and other governments as well for human rights abuses and various forms of corruption. I mean, the evidence is clearly there.
All right, Gregory Wilpert, we're having lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. One viewer saying people can say what they want about Trump, but he just helped one of the poorest, most dangerous countries in the world to have an opportunity to get back on their feet after terrible Maduro leadership. Your thoughts?
Well, there's so much to respond to. It's very difficult. I mean, first of all, whether this is a coup or not, I mean, it's clear it's not yet a coup, but clearly the U.S. government is calling for a coup, and so is the opposition. They've openly told or asked the military to intervene, to turn it against Maduro, and if they were to do that, that would be a coup, and it would mean bloodshed. We have to be very clear about this, that anybody who's saying that they're against dialogue is in favor of bloodshed. That's the bottom line.
No.
I think it's just so irresponsible to say that there cannot and should not be dialogue. Even the Pope and everybody else who is in any way responsible is saying that there has to be dialogue. And it's just, to me, it just seems absolutely unfathomable that somebody could say that they prefer the military turning against Maduro. That's one thing. The other thing, of course, about the evidence that this is a narco state, and that's just complete nonsense, is the only ones who have ever made that claim is the U.S. government, and they've never presented a shred of evidence about that. Now, I'm not saying that there is no corruption or that there is no involvement in drug trafficking in high levels of the government. That's certainly possible, but no evidence concretely, one way or the other, has ever been presented.
So you're saying that there is, I'm sorry, so you're saying that there is drug trafficking in the government, but you're saying that it's not a narco state. You're saying that that the president's own stepsons, who are inside of a U.S. jail right now for attempting to sell drugs to an undercover DEA agent, is not evidence of the government, of high-level government involvement in drug trafficking? Is that what you're saying? I mean, I just want to be clear what's happening now.
Yes, those are the stepsons. They're not involved in high levels of government. It's just, I mean, they were entrapped on top of it all.
Okay.
So I mean.
Okay. So the vice president working with. Okay. I'm just. Okay. I'll just have that out there. Okay.
It doesn't. That's not proof that this is a narco state. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Okay,
yes,
that's perfectly
yes, I'd like to just add that yes, we've tried the dialogue attempt in the past, and for once I do agree with Mr. Gregory Wilpert in the fact that there is a coup d'etat in Venezuela, and this coup d'etat took place in 2015 when Mr. Nicolas Maduro did not recognize the National Assembly that won legitimately the votes, and that's the person Guaido who is now in power. They stripped the National Assembly of its powers. They set up their own puppet assembly, and even the people that organized those elections, Smartmatic, said they couldn't account for the tally of votes that were given to that assembly. No. Those are the people that are ruling now. That is absolutely true. Those are the people that are ruling now instead of the National Assembly that was the last democratically elected government body in the country in 2015. After that, in 2017 was the Constituyente when we had this problem, and last year the election that we just proved is an illegitimate election.
Gregory Wilpert?
Well, there have been, he's right that there were negotiations and they failed, but they failed because the U.S. government intervened in various times trying to torpedo those negotiations. It's one of the main demands of the opposition was early elections. And there was a very close agreement last year where it almost happened, but then in the last minute, they fell apart for various reasons, and we have proof that there were meetings with high-level U.S. government officials and after that they canceled all the agreement. They refused to sign the final agreement, which had called for early elections. So if that had moved forward, that would have been an opportunity to prevent what is happening today. But it didn't happen mainly because the U.S. government and many other people in the radical right-wing opposition don't want real elections because they want a complete break with the current government, and that will only happen if there's a coup.
Right. Neither do the Chinese imperialists who have taken over PDVSA and basically control our petrol production and take 300,000 barrels a day. The Chinese imperialists, you never talk about, strangely. All the money that we're losing that we're giving to China, that you don't care about. But as soon as the U.S. has a dialogue with somebody from the opposition, we have to go after the boogeyman and its international intervention. What do you think about China?
Well, the Venezuelan government is repaying its loans to China. There's nothing particularly strange about that. Right. As a matter of fact, the Venezuela can only get loans practically from China at the moment because the U.S. has prevented, through international institutions, through the IMF, from Venezuela from accessing any kind of international credit lines.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to pick up on these points. Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
I'm Kalki. We are at Bombay, and we are going to go and discover my career in Bollywood on France 24.
This week, WLRI Fayol takes us to Mumbai. Our guest is a French actress based in India, the only one to make her mark on Bollywood. Kelki takes us on a stroll through the streets and museum corridors of India's biggest and wealthiest city, before embarking on a musical journey with film composer Naren Chandavarkar. Don't miss this special program on France 24 and France24.com.
The world is ever-changing. The news doesn't wait. That's why at France 24, we'll always be there to help make sense of world events. For the best international coverage, 24 hours a day, no matter what. France 24, with you everywhere, all the time.
My name is Osama Snoussi and I'm the Algiers correspondent for France 24. I bring you the latest news and stories from here, the capital Algiers, and beyond. You can watch me here on France 24 and also online at France24.com.
Osama Snoussi, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. The first peaceful transition of power in Congo's history. Felix Tshisekedi sworn in after an election marked by fraud. The successor to Joseph Kabila reaching out in his inaugural address to the opposition. Carlos Ghosn officially out. Renault unveils a two-headed management team which promises a governance overhaul at the French auto giant. Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire tells France 24 he's hoping for a strengthening of the alliance with Nissan and Mitsubishi. You'll hear his conversation with our own Stephen Carroll. A yellow vest slate of candidates for next May's European elections here in France. While it's too early to estimate how representative of the movement they are, one poll already suggests the list could be in third place, ahead of most of the mainstream parties. As Yemen's warring parties accuse each other of violating a truce agreement, we'll be telling you about 24 hours in the life of a family caught in the middle in the flashpoint port city of Hodeida. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and what could be a watershed moment, what with the U.S. and many of its regional allies declaring that they recognize the Speaker of Parliament, Juan Guaido, in Venezuela as the acting president, taking the standoff with the government of Nicolas Maduro a step further. With us to talk about it, Venezuelan writer Vicente Oliva, the author of I Killed Simon Bolivar. We're also with Venezuelan commentator Gustavo Rincon. From Washington, Ana Quintana, senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation think tank. And welcome back as well to Gregory Wilpert, managing editor of the Real News Network, author of Changing Venezuela by Taking Power, the History and Policies of the Chavez government. One question about the standoff with Washington, Ana Quintana. Nicolas Maduro has given U.S. diplomatic personnel 72 hours to leave the country. The U.S. State Department says it's not going to comply with the order. What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, frankly, Maduro is not the legitimate leader, so the U.S. State Department should not be accepting orders from him, right? The interim president has stated that all diplomatic personnel are welcome there and are welcome to maintain their diplomatic representations there. And I think this is a moment where the Maduro and his officials need to recognize what do they want to happen to their officials inside of Washington, D.C.? Do they also want to be sent back? I mean, I'm pretty sure they don't want to live in Venezuela right now, and I'm sure they enjoy their lives inside of Washington, D.C. And also, I think, you know, for those wondering or are concerned about the safety of our diplomats, I think Maduro would have to be, frankly, borderline suicidal to do anything to diplomats under the administration of President Trump. I mean, let's be frank, right? We saw how the administration responded to the health attacks against the diplomats inside of Cuba. I mean, we know that the administration is going to respond even stronger if anything were to happen to U.S. diplomats in Caracas.
Gregory Wilpert, how do you see it unfolding, that standoff with the U.S. refusing to evacuate its diplomats from the Venezuelan capital?
Well, first of, I think it's unheard of in the history of the world that diplomats would be allowed to stay in a country that they've been expelled from, no matter who is the government that the U.S. recognizes. But the other thing is, of course, I mean, there's no question that they're safe. They can have a security detail of 100 people and will be escorted to the airport. And I'm sure they'll be completely, perfectly safe. There's no reason to be concerned for their safety. However, the government, regardless of who the U.S. thinks is president, has the right to expel them and will probably expel them from the country under complete safety procedures. So there's no concern there. Of course, the question is how will the U.S. react to that, and they'll probably expel the Venezuelan diplomats from the United States. That's perfectly normal, and I'm sure they're completely ready for that eventuality.
In Venezuela this Thursday, we heard this warning by the defense minister saying an attempted coup is afoot.
I warn the people of Venezuela of this very dangerous claim. It's dangerous for our integrity and our social peace. I warn the people of Venezuela that a coup d'etat is coming against our institutions, against our democracy, against our constitution, and against President Nicolas Maduro, the legitimate president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
What's your reaction? How is it going to unfold?
First of all, again, I completely agree with Mr. Paulino Lopez. There was a coup d'etat, and it happened in 2015 when Nicolas Maduro did not recognize the legitimately elected National Assembly. The best way that this could unfold is the blueprint that Mr. Guaido has, that is calling elections within a month, pardoning people that have worked for the regime, that except those that committed humanitarian attacks, and letting in the humanitarian. That would be the best issue for everybody, and it implies no violence. Now, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario would be maybe the government or Maduro himself taking a hardline dictatorship approach and just encroaching into power. We don't know enough to know where this is going to go, but it's anywhere in the middle.
Be honest here, Vincent, because we're hearing a lot of speculation.
Yes.
We're inside the same week where there was an attempted mutiny at a National Guard's barracks outside of Caracas. How actively is the outside world rooting for the rank and file of soldiers to rise up against the top brass?
Yeah, well, actually, that's the play here by the opposition is exactly that. We've tried to do this before. In 2014 and 2017, it was the same. Try to get the military to bring us to elections. So the idea here is actually giving them a free pass and saying, hey, if you're not with Maduro, then nothing's going to happen to you, so you can back a transition. So the idea here is that if the military can just flip en masse, then that could bring a transition, because what's happened before is that they've done it one by one and they've all been put into jail. So that would be also a possibility, but the international community, the importance of it is telling the military that it's okay to recognize Guaido and call for elections.
Gustavo Rincon?
Yes. I think truly here we have only two possibilities. First one is that, like every time in that kind of situation on Venezuela, that Guaido stay making some speeches and claiming for months and months, and just the things stay.
That's
like,
a possibility. Yes. Absolutely.
The other option, I think the peaceful option, the option I believe and I want, is to start to make a dialogue, to speak
again,
because you know the situation.
We've done that before.
You have to try again.
Oh, okay. And the people that are in jail,
like the leader of his party, Leopoldo Lopez, is under house arrest.
Yes, yes, but he wasn't for dialogue. He's in jail because he talked. No, it's not about that.
Yeah, but he's not the only person in jail. We have people that have been tortured. This has been documented. So we tell them to wait for another dialogue?
In jail, but all the protests anti-Maduro in the last year, you know that most part of the dead are military and policemen, not civilian.
Okay, that's another.
It's another thing.
What I'm saying. No, it's not true.
It's normal that if
we had 140 people killed in 2017. They were not policemen and they were not officers. They were. We know who they were. We documented it.
Most part of them were
that's not
military and policemen.
Okay, but why can't we have an election?
You know that Maduro, the last thing that Maduro wants now is civilian deaths.
What are we going to talk about?
Because Trump says very clearly, all options are in the table for any violent situation. You know, if we have 10 kills in Caracas,
right?
You know that it will be the end of Maduro. And he knows that, like Chavez.
Oh, you know what Maduro knows. Right.
No, it's just, you heard the speech of Trump.
Yeah, I
mean,
even a broken clock is right twice a day. I mean, as the tweet said, yes, I mean, Trump said something sensible for once. Hallelujah. But let's not focus on Trump. Let's focus really on the things that are happening, on the people that aren't getting medicine.
All right. Trump's decision to weigh in is one thing that's changed the equation. The other, well, it's Juan Guaidó himself. Unknown just a few weeks ago. Kathy Clifford takes a look at
Estamos en la calle. Tenemos a la comunidad internacional. ¿A quién reconoce la comunidad internacional?
An unknown figure until just a few weeks ago. Now he's been thrust into the spotlight as the face of Venezuela's anti-Maduro movement. At 35 years old, Juan Guaidó became the youngest ever president of the National Assembly. Since his election on January 5th, he's managed to get his opposition majority to officially denounce President Nicolás Maduro's re-election as fraud, a message he's hammering home on the streets.
Just because Maduro has the sash, that makes him president? Just because Maduro has the symbol of power, it makes him a leader? That legitimacy comes from the ballot box, the people, their strengths, the streets, from the recognition and love of our people.
Juan Guaidó began his political career in 2007 amongst the crowds of students protesting against late President Hugo Chavez. 2 years later, he was a founding member of the opposition Popular Will Party, then led by Leopoldo López, who's since been imprisoned and then placed under house arrest. The former industrial engineer then returned to his home state of Vargas, where he was elected a deputy in 2015 at just 31 years old. Juan Guaidó is now calling for a transitional government ahead of free and fair elections, saying he's willing to replace Maduro as interim president if he can gain the military's backing. For now, he can count on international support from the likes of the US, Brazil, and the Organization of American States, which referred to him as Venezuela's acting president.
Gurgun Rupert, what do you make of Juan Guaidó?
Well, I mean, he's certainly somebody who belongs to Venezuela's upper class, and so in that sense, he's not going to be accepted probably by the vast majority of Venezuelans. But
we've had upper class presidents before. Excuse me, Caldera governed twice, and there wasn't richer than him. That's not an argument.
Well, I still don't think that he's going to be accepted. He wasn't popularly elected, but whatever. The other thing is, of course, that he lacks complete experience, of which, of course, something that they've always accused Maduro of. Okay, but fine. I mean, I don't know exactly what to expect, except that I think his course of action is, like I said before, a very, very dangerous course of action, basically calling for a military coup, which will lead to, if it were to happen, would lead to bloodshed and violence, and therefore I think that's absolutely unacceptable. I really hope that he changes course and offers a dialogue with President Maduro, and which Maduro has already said he's open towards.
Anna Quintana, you agree?
Yes. Well, I'm just saying his two criticisms of Guaidó are the same, are two defining factors of Maduro. Somebody who's of the upper class and somebody who is not supported nor was widely elected by the Venezuelan people. So right there, that's a non-starter, right? We should put Maduro in a box and kind of put him to the side. I mean, it's an absolute fact. And so I think what we keep on talking about, the only two options to kind of, as the off-ramps, we keep on talking about either the military option or either negotiations as the only off-ramps for this current crisis. But those aren't the only current off-ramps. Look, Maduro has already ransacked, pillaged, and destroyed Venezuela. He's bled the country dry. His cronies have as well. Right now, he can literally get on a plane, he can get on a 747, go to Cuba, go to whatever country of his choosing, and spend the rest of his life, and that's it, and he's fine. And there can be a transitional government that's put in place. He can stop the bloodshed, he can stop the violence, he can stop it all. Right now is a very pivotal moment. Nobody's calling for a military coup, but I think now is a pivotal moment for the Venezuelan military, for the security forces, and for the Venezuelan government writ large to recognize and to sit back and take a self-reflecting moment and recognize, are they going to support as the leader the person who is an international pariah who much of the Western Hemisphere does not recognize as a legitimate leader of Venezuela, or are they going to recognize the interim president who has said that he supports having elections and he supports a restructuring and a fixing of the economy? I mean, the choices are clear.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that are complete nonsense there. First of all, I mean, Maduro...
Okay, please tell me. I mean, yeah, please.
He was elected in 2013 when running against Enrique Capriles, and the election.
So when he was appointed, so when he was Chavez's handpicked successor, I mean, that didn't give him the upper hand, right? And when they rigged the election against Capriles, that again didn't give him the upper hand. But please continue. Yeah.
And the election in 2018, the opposition boycotted. But we can argue about these points until we're blue in the face. That's not really the main point.
There weren't international observers in the election. It was a sham election. How can you say that, Gregory?
I mean, but look.
One at a time, please. One at a time. Gregory.
The way out. And the only way out that makes sense is a dialogue, because clearly Maduro believes and is convinced that he's the legitimately elected president. He's not going to resign. He's had 6 million votes in the last election, 6.2 million votes. He's not going to give that up without a clear alternative as to how to preserve the dignity and the project that he and Chavez fought for.
Sure. So look, I can convince myself that I'm Queen Elizabeth. That doesn't make me Queen Elizabeth, right? What we need to recognize is that dialogues in Venezuela, the Venezuelan government has consistently used dialogues as a stalling tactic, and they have never engaged in dialogues in good faith. They have not done so. And it's not been because of the U.S. government, it's been because of them.
Gregory Wilpert, let me ask you, because on Wednesday, when we saw those mass demonstrations, our correspondent saw with her own eyes people marching in areas that are normally loyal to the government. What does that tell you?
Well, no doubt the Maduro government has lost a lot of popular support because of the economic crisis. There's no doubt about that. And I think actually if there were elections between an opposition candidate and Maduro at this moment, Maduro would have a good chance of losing those elections. As a matter of fact, I even think that if the opposition had not boycotted the 2018 presidential election, he would have probably lost. But we don't know, because the opposition does not want an election. They clearly have always wanted a complete, starting over with no one of Chavismo remaining in any branch of government, and basically wiping Chavismo off the face of the earth. That's been the main objective. That's the reason why they aren't interested in elections that are mediated.
But hang on, Gregory, it is the government who, faced with an opposition-controlled parliament, decided it wanted to change the constitution.
Sorry?
It is the government of Nicolas Maduro, when faced with an opposition-controlled parliament, that decided it wanted to change the constitution.
Illegally.
Yeah, they boycotted that election as well for the Constitutional Assembly. If they had participated there, I'm pretty sure that they would have won a majority as well.
What are you talking about? Where is our National Assembly that we won by the votes in 2015? Where is Antonio Ledesma, who won in 2007 when Chavez was still alive and was removed from power by Chavez? The opposition has won elections in the past, and every time they win, the person winds up in jail or the power is transferred to somebody else. So we can't take that route either. I mean, it's ridiculous that you stand here and you say that in 2017 we should have gone for the recall referendum election, which was illegitimate to start with. We had the National Assembly. We didn't want a recall referendum. And we got more votes than them in 2017. Even Smartmatic, which is the company that Maduro chose to count the votes, even they say the opposition had more votes and that they can't account for 2 million votes. They organize the elections. How do you explain that?
They're not involved in that election. They were not involved in that election. It was their machines, but they were not involved.
It was the speech about the Smartmatic. Smartmatic sell the machine, sold the machine to the government, and because the unpopularity of Maduro, they have to step aside and say, we don't, we weren't.
So they didn't check the tallies either, because the Smartmatic machines have tallies that you check. They were not checked, and the government cannot account for the 8 million votes
every
that they
time
had.
someone from the opposition won an election, they go automatically to jail.
I didn't say automatically.
Because we had...
I didn't say automatically.
All right, before we say the assembly is... I don't know, 80%?
I told you,
We've seen
Ledesma, the assembly doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It has no power.
For which reason? Antonio
because the tribunal nullified it like the dictatorships do. Look, open your eyes. It's a dictatorship. Dictatorships nullify the National Assembly like Fujimori did. They take the tribunal, they pack it with court judges, and they put people in jail. What more do you want? There's NGOs that recognize this. I mean, come on.
What we can agree on is the fact that the economy in Venezuela has triggered what the United Nations lists as the world's worst refugee crisis, with hyperinflation out of control. 2.4 million citizens have fled Venezuela in the past 4 years, most for neighboring states.
Before, you could have a good savings plan. You had money for that. Now, you can buy 5 or 6 things, and after that, you don't have anything left. Forget shoes, forget t-shirts, forget underwear, forget it all. We don't have enough money for practically anything.
But what's dangerous is to stay here with the child that coughs. That's a flu and can take antibiotics because there aren't any. What's dangerous is to stay here with a fracture, to go around 20 hospitals with no one able to help you. It's more dangerous to stay here, to go looking for money or bread, than to go on the road.
So Ana Quintana, actively pushing for regime change, is that going to, in the short term, help Venezuela, or, as Gustavo Rincon was fearing, stir bloodshed and even more hardship?
We need to stop looking at this as though there are two binary options. What's happening right now is you have the international community, much of Latin America, and a growing list of countries that do not recognize Nicolas Maduro as president, right? Nobody is directly pushing for regime change. What they are asking for is for there to be a democratic transition. Nicolas Maduro can agree to elections. Maduro can agree to step down and let the interim president take over. There's a lot of, there's a process, there's multiple processes in place that Nicolas Maduro can agree to. But the fact of the matter is that Nicolas Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, have demonstrated they do not care about their country and they don't care about their people. They just do not care.
Gregory Wilpert?
Well, it's just, again, I mean, the fact that the Maduro government and also before that President Chavez contributed to the biggest decline in inequality. And now, of course, much of this has been reversed.
How do you measure inequality? I'm sorry, I'm curious. How do you measure inequality?
It shows that they definitely do care about the people of Venezuela. And, of course, now we can argue about the individual policies.
That was 10 years ago, by the way.
But
I know that exactly. I'm curious as to how he measures inequality. Like, how specifically are you measuring this? Because I'm measuring 50,000 Venezuelans fleeing the country every day. I'm looking at the last time that I was in Colombia. Every child that came up to me was a Venezuelan panhandler.
I said that it has been reversed the last couple of years because of the economic crisis, and the economic crisis can be attributed to two main factors. One is the government's own mistakes in handling the economy, and the other is the oil price, and three factors, and the other is the sanctions against Venezuela. But and it's true.
The sanctions are targeted sanctions against corrupt Venezuelan government officials. The sanctions are not against the government.
They are returning to their home countries, really. Venezuela has been harboring or has been welcoming 4 million Colombians, for example. Many of them have decided to return to Colombia. So it's not only Venezuelans who are leaving Venezuela.
So you're saying that the refugee crisis right now is Colombians that are returning back home?
A large chunk, about half of them are estimated.
A large chunk? And let me tell you, shame on you, because right now there are literally children that are starving and dying. There are families that are being ripped apart and separated because of this refugee crisis, and you're claiming that it's just Colombians returning back home. That's absolutely factually inaccurate.
We're gonna have to, unfortunately, leave it there because we're running short on time. But I want to thank you so much, Gregory Wilpert and Ana Quintana, for being with us from Washington, D.C., Vicente Uribe, Gustavo Rincon. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Nicholas Rushworth.
Hi to you, Francois. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
And El Presidente
not Hugo Chavez, but Nicolas Maduro has been tweeting in the last few hours. He tweets regularly in Spanish, French, other languages, and English. We can go to his latest tweet, which is determined in that Bolivarian style. We will not accept any empire imposing governments on us by extra-constitutional means. In Venezuela, respect for the will of the people, the constitution and sovereignty will reign. We shall prevail, is what he's saying. So, two presidents, deadlock, chaos, we've seen before, of course, in Venezuela. He has two hashtags for his point of view. He has hashtag We Are Maduro and hashtag Yankee Go Home. And there you can see some of the people tweeting, saying, I voted for him. He's in a constitutional right, of course. So one of the supporters outside Venezuela is Vladimir Putin. Bloomberg has an opinion piece here saying, in terms of that geopolitical aspect to this, Putin is basically is in his bid to attack the USA and other Western countries, he has to stick by Maduro simply for the fact that tens of billions of dollars are invested if the country goes down the tubes with Maduro in charge and a US-led regime comes in, or a US-backed regime comes in, then there will be a direct cost for him. So there he's saying the government has got a strong support from Turkey as well and other countries. So we've been seeing countries that are backing Guaido. The front pages of the regional press tell the story. There we've got the Argentinian front page, La Voz, two presidents, political tension increasing. We've got La Razón in Mexico saying Mexico and Uruguay are pushing for dialogue here as the opposition in Venezuela go for a frontal shock with Maduro. And here, the Colombian paper, Por la Democracia, so backing Guaido. So there are countries who are favor in the region, and globally there are also countries that are actually supporting Maduro. Just in terms of Guaido himself, his tweet page is literally the support he's getting. So here we've got Luis Alberto Moreno, who is the president of the Inter-American Bank in South America. We've got Mauricio Macri there, the president tweeting his support. We've got the Canadian Forest Minister, Chrystia Freeland. So he's just basically sending out his support for himself and what he's doing. So two presidents. What we've got in terms of the media is an erosion in terms of censorship. There is very little anti-Maduro publications out there. We do have...
But that's where social media comes in.
Well, indeed, exactly, which is where it's being fought, this battle now. But El Nacional is still going. It stopped its print runs in December. Yes. Now it's only online, only paper shortages prevent them. And there you can see inflation at, what is it, over 1 million %. And then you have the poor Venezuelan who is saying, I live on minimum wage, which is impossible, of course. Yes. So a horror story. The tragedy of Venezuela has been going on for years and now perhaps reached a head.
We shall see. Many thanks for that, Nicholas Rushworth. I want to thank our panelists once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
We are journalists, and normally you have to listen to us, but you have things to tell us too. Maybe you've experienced a dramatic event, or you've got something important to say. You want to make a difference. That is why we created The Observers. Now, the first step is very easy. You get in touch with our team. Send us your images, tell us what you've seen. And then it's our job to get your voice out there, on our site, on social networks, on your mobiles and tablets, and on TV, of course. You can appear in our weekly show via webcam. Or perhaps we'll come see you in person, where you live, in your country, your town, and we'll work together on a report for our investigative show, The Observers Direct. So you get the idea. This show is your show, your way to get your voice out to the world.
35 years ago, President Félix Houphouët-Boigny moved the capital city of Ivory Coast to Yamoussoukro, his native village. Huge construction sites were set up to transform the ancient village into a modern city. An international airport was built, a polytechnical institute, the presidential palace, and even one of the world's largest churches. But the planned transfer of institutions never happened, and very few people ever moved there. France 24 offers you a tour of the abandoned capital city.
Inside one of the world's most unknown capital cities, all this week on France 24.
It's 8 p.m. here in the French capital. The headlines from around the world. DRC's new president vows to reconcile the country after its first peaceful transfer of power. But his detractors continue to dispute his election win. Moscow lines up in defense of Nicolas Maduro, but there's uncertainty in Venezuela after the head of the opposition declares himself interim president with Washington's blessing. And France's Yellow Vest protesters step into the political fray. They're set to field candidates in upcoming European elections. You're watching live from Paris. Thanks for joining us. More on all those headline items coming up. We're going to start in eastern Syria. Yesterday, our team brought you exclusive footage of the exodus from the so-called Islamic State's last stronghold there. And we can get an update now with our reporter, James Andre. Good evening to you, James. Tell us a little bit more about what you've seen over the last couple of days.
I solemnly swear before God and the nation to observe and defend the Constitution and the laws of the Republic.
The handover of power closes the chapter on 2 years of uncertainty when Kabila didn't step down even though his term had expired. The last months of Kabila's 18-year rule were also overshadowed by vote-rigging allegations for his succession. Runner-up Martin Fayulu continues to contest the result and accuses Tshisekedi of a power-sharing deal with the outgoing leader. The new president, though, called for a reconciled Congo.
The Democratic Republic of Congo that we will build will not be a country of division, of hate, or of tribalism. We want a strong Congo, strong in its cultural diversity and its dedication to its motherland. A Congo focused on its development, peace and security. A Congo for everyone, where everyone has their place.
A message his supporters welcomed. Thousands had gathered in the streets of Kinshasa to catch a glimpse of the historic transition of power. According to constitutional rules, Tshisekedi is set to choose a prime minister from Kabila's camp. This as they maintain a strong grip on the National Assembly.
We're going to try and get more on eastern Syria now, where yesterday our team brought you exclusive footage of the exodus from the so-called Islamic State's last stronghold. I hope we can talk to our reporter, James Andre. James, can you hear us?
Yes, I do hear you, loud and clear.
Excellent. James, tell us a little bit more about what you've seen over the last couple of days.
Well, today we tried to get as close as possible to the front line, and we're actually currently just a few kilometers out. And what we did see is extensive destruction along the way. We crossed the city of Hajin, which was the last real city that was held by the Islamic State group. And there, well, there are pretty much no buildings still standing. Everything is totally destroyed. There are huge craters along the road. But we did see today some civilians coming back, discovering the state of their houses, trying to start to clear up the rubble. And then as we closed into this front line, well, we were told told that we had to stop simply because, and that gives a good idea of the violence of the fighting here, simply because the Islamic State group was on a counter-offensive against the Syrian Democratic Forces, this Kurdish Arabic coalition that is backed by the international coalition. Well, indeed, they had to move back today in the face of a vicious attack by the Islamic State group, which had foot soldiers attacking this position, but also artillery and drones. The Islamic State group uses drones that they have modified so they can drop bombs on enemy positions, and this is what happened today. So indeed, the Syrian Democratic Forces had advanced about 1 kilometer yesterday, and they have had to move back a little bit this afternoon due to heavy fighting. So there are only 2 villages left in the hands of the Islamic State group, but indeed they are completely encircled, but they're still fighting back. What is left inside those 2 villages are the most hardened, the most radical fighters that the group has.
Tell us a little bit more, James, about the exodus which we saw in your report yesterday. Who were among those fleeing? There were some European women in that report we saw.
Yeah, there were European women indeed. We've been told that over the past few days about 60 nationals from foreign countries, international jihadists, if you will, have been leaving those last villages. We were told that there were some French people, some British nationals, some Americans, and indeed a large group of these foreigners. And these are very much the most radical militants of the organizations. They are the ones who have traveled from abroad, that started living in this self-styled caliphate. A lot of them were actually based in Raqqa for a long time, and then they basically retreated with the other members of the organization right along the Euphrates River until this very last square of resistance that is currently under attack just a few kilometers from here. It's important to note that these people are basically right now in a difficult situation. They're completely encircled, they're totally besieged. Some of them are indeed choosing to surrender to the Syrian Democratic Forces, and that obviously is an interesting option for them, simply because the Kurdish YPG, which is the backbone of the Syrian Democratic Forces, does not apply the death penalty. So indeed, if they surrender, well, they will not be executed by the Syrian Democratic Forces. If they stay, chances are they will eventually be killed. As I was telling you, the fighting is extremely. We're not very far from an artillery position of the US Army, or at least the coalition, and we've been hearing those shells depart from that position all afternoon. So what we are seeing here is vicious fighting and indeed a massive exodus. When it comes to civilians and women, there are over 4,000 people who have left these last villages over the last 72 hours. We've been able to speak to them. These are people who've paid smugglers to manage to get through the minefields that the Islamic State group has set all over here. It's important to note that the whole region is completely mined. That is probably the biggest threat on the rear lines. And indeed, there are also guerrilla attacks on the rear of this battle. So a lot of violence, and these civilians fleeing hunger, disease, and who are in a very, very difficult position right now.
James Andre, thanks for joining us. Moving on, world powers are split as to who's the legitimate leader of Venezuela. That after opposition head Juan Guaido on Wednesday declared himself interim president and vowed to create a transitional government. He was swiftly backed by the US, Brazil and other regional powers, but Russia and Mexico are throwing their weight behind Nicolas Maduro, with Moscow saying the move was a direct path to bloodshed. Maduro started his second term on the 10th of January following a largely boycotted election, which many international observers say was a sham. For more, I'm joined from Washington by Jeff Ramsey, who's Assistant Director for Venezuela at Rights Group WLRI. Thank you very much for talking to us. How much trouble is President Maduro in?
Well, thanks for having me. I think it's a bit difficult to tell at this time. The truth is that while there were major protests around the country yesterday, and obviously the opposition now has the support of the international community, which is recognizing Juan Guaido as the legitimate interim president, that hasn't seemed to change the equation for Maduro on the ground. He still relies on the support of the armed forces, which has publicly sworn its loyalty to him. And there appears to be no major fissures within his ruling circle. And without that, I think it's difficult to expect some kind of transition in Venezuela.
What's been going on behind the scenes in all of this? Yesterday's events, there was Guaido's move, Trump's recognition, Pompeo. It all seemed very choreographed.
Well, there's certainly none of this was improvised. You know, I think it's very clear that this was very well coordinated. The international community was well prepared for Guaido's declaration, particularly the United States. But I think what this was about signaling and sending a message to the key power brokers in the ruling coalition right now that they'll get the support of the international community if they support a transition and break from Maduro. The fact that we haven't seen that so far, and we're now about 24 hours since the opposition has declared a parallel government, suggests that the opposition and international community may need to recalculate. I think we're much more likely now to see some kind of negotiated settlement than for a solution to this by force.
Jeff Ramsey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now they emerged largely online, took to the roads and roundabouts of France and rocked the government. The Gilets jaunes, or yellow vest protesters, have struck a chord with their message of anger and distrust of traditional politics. Now they're looking to run their own candidates in May's European elections. And Selena Sykes reporting that their list of demands remains as diverse as ever.
On the streets, in television studios and at the heart of efforts to organise the movement, Ingrid Levervasseur has become one of the leading figures of the Yellow Vests.
We've shown France that we're not idiots. I think we're capable of creating something.
She's now announced that she'll be heading a Yellow Vest list in the European Parliament elections in May.
French citizens no longer want to be subject to the decisions of European bodies and the diktats of the financial class.
The 31-year-old care worker is at the forefront of calls for a citizens' initiative referendum, a popular vote that would allow the French people to vet government policy proposals. It's one of the Yellow Vests' main demands, but they're divided when it comes to running in European elections.
I don't agree at all, because the Yellow Vests haven't created a list on my behalf.
If they want to present a list, they can go ahead, but with the knowledge that it could be manipulated.
In a survey on voting intentions, the Yellow Vests came in third place, behind Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche and Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party. Findings that may be a cause for concern for political parties who had been hoping to win over Yellow Vest supporters at the polls.
I thought that the Yellow Vests in the streets supported the fact that the movement was detached from politics. At the same time, it's part of democracy.
I'm asking candidates to give some clarity, because politics is already so tainted in our country that if the Yellow Vests continue to taint it, the French people will be disillusioned with everything.
The Yellow Vests have so far named 10 candidates and hope to put forward another 69 for a vote by the 10th of February.
Now, the end of the road for Carlos Ghosn. After weeks of waiting and hoping for him to be released from a Japanese jail, Renault has replaced him with two new leaders as the embattled French automaker looks to preserve its alliance with Nissan and Mitsubishi. France 24's Catherine Viette has more.
Renault closes a chapter. Carlos Ghosn, its longtime chief executive and chairman, is gone. To replace him, the car maker split those responsibilities between two men. Thierry Bolloré, the new chief executive, Ghosn's designated successor, a man who has worked in Asia for years, and Jean-Dominique Sénard, the new chairman, who headed until recently tire maker Michelin.
It is important today to re-establish a form of calmness. after the particularly extraordinary events that we've just experienced. There will also be a second essential task, which will be to engage myself quickly in the ongoing talks with the Alliance, with our partners from Nissan and Mitsubishi.
Their common goal, saving the alliance with Nissan and Mitsubishi, something that's also crucial for the French government, which holds a 15% stake in Renault.
Our main objective is to preserve the alliance between Renault and Nissan, make it stronger, and allow Renault to function properly.
Renault took a stake in Nissan in 1999 when the Japanese car maker was on the brink of bankruptcy. Their alliance allows them to save some 5.5 billion euros per year through their common platforms, purchasing and development. But their partnership is not an equal one. Renault holds 43% of Nissan, which enables it to vote on board decisions, while Nissan holds just 15% of Renault. The distribution was decided when Nissan was weaker than Renault, but the Japanese car has turned around its situation, producing more than the French brand. And its leaders want to review the deal.
Watching live from Paris here on France 24. Do stay tuned. Coming up, an exclusive interview with Gianni Infantino.
And that is aimed at getting more kids into school, keeping them there for as long as possible. And also, they'll be supporting teachers to make sure that the quality of education that these children receive sets them up for as best a future as possible. So to talk about how all of this is going to work, I'm very happy to say I'm joined by the president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino. Gianni, thanks so much for coming in to speak to us. Now, first of all, UNESCO.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure is all ours and our viewers, I'm sure. So we've got UNESCO, yes. We have got the World Food Programme. We're used to them being involved in humanitarian affairs and development programs. And then we've got FIFA. How come you've joined the team?
Strange, right? It's strange because normally people associate FIFA with football, with the World Cup, with competitions, and it's not obvious at first sight that FIFA, being the football governing body of the world, has also, that's at least the way that I see it and the way that the new FIFA sees it, a social importance. Football is more than just a game, we know that, and we know that as FIFA we need to take our responsibilities, not only when it comes to the game itself, but also to our social role. And we want to play this responsibility at full, and that's why we are very happy and proud that we've been able to team up with UNESCO and the World Food Programme in this fantastic Football for Schools project that we are launching to put school education at the forefront of what we are doing.
So how are you going to do it? What does this program specifically entail?
Well, it's a very challenging and very interesting program that where we have partnered up with these two great organizations. We want to touch 700 million kids, boys and girls, all around the world, from the age of 6 to the age of 15, bringing to them not only footballs. We will flood the world with balls. We will send 11 million balls all around the world. But we will also present to the schools around the world a football program. A football program which is part of the, or will be part of the school curriculums of primary schools and secondary schools all around the world, where actually the important element is not football skills, but life skills, taught through football. Because when you speak about football, you can speak about many aspects. You can speak about the values of football, the team work, the respect for the opponent, the respect for the referee, for the laws of the game, so for the laws more generally. But you can speak also about violence, about drugs, about equality, about sexual harassment, about obesity, about many, many topics that can be brought to children through football.
So you mentioned the values of football.
Yes.
You came you were elected in 2016, and right after that huge scandal that still overshadows FIFA to many people around the world, and you made it very clear that what you wanted to do was present a new face for FIFA.
Yes.
Is this a useful PR opportunity, or is this linked in a more wider way to an illustration of a change in the values of the organization?
Definitely it is. It is changing the way we see our role. The role of FIFA, the way we see it, the way I see it as the FIFA president, certainly after the big scandal that happened a few years ago. Otherwise I would never have been elected FIFA president as well. But the new way we want to present ourselves is to take our role seriously. Our role is to organize competitions, to organize football, definitely, to develop football around the world. And for this, we are already investing 1.8 billion over a 4-year period for football development all around the world. Half of the world would have no football without the solidarity contributions that we give. But this is not enough, because football means so much to so many people around the world. And when we have been seeing what can we do, what can we take as our social theme, as our social responsibility part, we have found that education is really something that fits quite well with football, that is maybe not the priority of other bodies around the world, except for governments or governmental bodies. But we thought that, and studies show this as well, that when you speak about something that interests kids, they listen in a different way. And football is something that interests many kids around the world. So through football, we can, in cooperation with UNESCO, with World Food Programme, we can bring and teach some of these values to the children. This is part of the way we see our role. It's natural, it's normal. It's normal that we go beyond the simple football on the pitch, and that we try to do something for society, because we are part of society.
There's no doubt that the kids are going to be very excited about this, but part of the problem is oversight, because as much money that's going to be funneled into this program, how is there going to be some kind of guarantee that the local operators implementing this plan, this scheme, with all the best of intentions, actually deliver what is intended?
That's a good, very good question, and that's why we decided to team up with both UNESCO and World Food Programme, because they have the necessary networks and expertise in these areas. On our side, what we will contribute is the balls themselves, of course, but also the curriculum, the educational curriculum for the schools. And we will be helped in this by our own network, which is a network of 211 countries around the world, which are FIFA members, where we have our member associations with their staff, which will be part of putting this project into place. Now, of course, we will depend on governments, will depend on ministries of education, how much they buy in, and we will try to convince them. And from the first discussions we had with some heads of state and government, they are all very, very interested, and I'm sure that they will all be very engaged in this project.
And how are you selling it to governments? Is it a humanitarian program, or is it more like more an investment in their economic future?
It is a social program for us, which is probably a little bit of a mix between the humanitarian and the investment in the economic future. There is no doubt that football today has a social and an economic role, which goes, again, beyond the pitch. A good result on the pitch can change the whole mindset of a country. If they qualify, if they win a competition or whatever. I've been traveling to Africa very recently, to 9 countries in Africa, and And you could see, because there are some deciding games now to be played for the qualification to the African Cup of Nations, now the whole country is vibrating for football. And you can see that football can help